Hello everyone, welcome. Today I want to talk about something that feels rather, it's a little vulnerable for me to talk about. Excuse me, for me to talk about. And I cough. And the reason why there's some vulnerability for me is because the way in which this message that I'm going to share needs to be delivered. It needs to be delivered in a way that it is so that it is interpreted properly by you, the listener. Because the subject I'm talking about is shame. And shame is something that can really bring a lot of animation and triggers and defensiveness to the surface. So much wounding in our lives, in our culture, and in our biological, hey Brenda, in our biological, in our psychological DNA, shame threads so far back for us in our lives and into our life, sometimes present day. So I want to be very strategic in how I articulate this to you. So the other piece that I'm going to bring in here is the shadow, and that is something that many of you have heard me speak about before. I speak about it often. It is a big component of the work that I do and how I help people to see their own shadow patterns, as well as seeing and owning their own light. So what came up for me and why I decided to speak about this is because of the situation with George Floyd. And the other day, I will from time to time run this scenario in my head of the social, not only the social ethos that's occurring presently right now, but the effects of this type of world event, because it was a world event. It wasn't just here in the United States or in a particular state, right? In the state, it's a world event. And everything that's happening for us actually collectively are world events, and we're not done yet. We are not done yet. We're still in 2020, and there are some pretty intense astrology coming up still. But back to the conversation of shame and the shadow. So what came up for me in the reflecting back on this incident and the vision that I had of the officer with his knee on this man's neck, is that here's what I have come to know about the shadow and how it operates within all of us, for all of us. Is that shadow, right, is that thing that we keep hidden. It's that thing that we keep hidden, consciously or unconsciously. We keep it hidden, sometimes intentionally, and then there are other aspects of self where we don't even realize that it's there. And when the shadow is revealed, the element of shame will sometimes arise. And the shame comes from several aspects, of course, but it can come from the place of the realization about ourselves that we hadn't had until that moment. Shame can come from the realization that people actually are seeing something about us that we maybe always knew or even didn't know, and that now it's being seen. So, the shadow does everything it can to protect itself. It wants to stay hidden. We see a lot of shadow out there right now. We see a whole lot of shadow out there right now, and we see a lot of protecting of the shadow happening out there. So in this incidence of George Floyd and this being videotaped was actually a worldwide shaming. And again, don't take that word shame or shaming into the way that maybe you have always kept it in your body, to where it's something that should never happen. Because the thing about shame, what it can bring forth is an awareness, a very, very deep awareness of something that needs the attention, that needs the quality of highlighting in our lives so that we can choose something different. Shame also brings the element of humility, of being humbled. And even though one may disregard if shame is brought to the surface, and one may disregard that they actually were humbled by the shame of their shadow being exposed, doesn't mean they necessarily own the humility, that they've actually, had some kind of transformational or epiphany. But there is a level in which one can feel that being humbled by the shame being exposed. So as I play that scenario out of all of those cell phones videotaping this man being held down by the officer, and the officers also that are around him observing him, what came up for me is the degree of how this was so wrong, not only for the literal reasons that we all know, but it's also what got our attention is the quality, the element of shame that came up in this. That these men who kept this man down, that there was shame being exposed. Their shame was being exposed. They didn't realize it at the time, and they probably, I don't know who knows what's going on with them, but shame is what came that got the attention of everybody. It's like that expression, shame on you, right? There's times when we'll say that because it is so appropriate for a situation, when somebody has done something that they know better, or that even if they didn't know better, but it's, I don't know, it's like that's such a tricky area, so I don't want to necessarily, I kind of take that part back. There's some things that we know better. There are just some things morally that we just know better as humans. Narcissists will struggle with this even more. But we know when we're hurting somebody. We know when we're doing something wrong. And that's where that expression sometimes is so appropriate, when one might say, shame on you, because you knew better. You know what you're doing, and you know what you did. So the shame and shadow are related. I know for myself in my own experiences of having my shadow exposed, and sometimes it would be where nobody else saw or was witness to what I was experiencing, but I have felt shame about myself for choices that I had made or for actions that I had taken. And the thing is that I didn't go into victimize myself about it. It's like it brought me to that place of being humbled in that moment that changed me. It changed how I moved forward. It transformed something inside of me, and it exposed me to bring that shadow into the light. I feel that it's important to have this conversation about shame and shadow because of what is occurring for us right now culturally, and on so many levels, like I said before, that the shadow is being exposed right now. And when the shadow is being exposed, as we're seeing it out there, we're seeing it in our government, and we're seeing it for us in the United States in our government, and I'm sure maybe in other countries' government, but we're seeing this show up in a way that it's being hard to avoid it, right? And so we're watching, the deflection of shadow happening. But the truth is that, you know, we can only deflect for so long, because life has a way of navigating itself around us to hold us to some form of accountability. Now, we don't have to necessarily own the accountability, but we will definitely experience the accountability in one way or another. Because I know that all of us listening, and myself included, I know people who just do not know how to hold themselves accountable. And if they are accountable, they'll just continue on the same trajectory. So going back to how I started this conversation about shame and the shadow and this situation with George Floyd, is that is a powerful piece here in this scenario of how this all showed up. Is that, you know, for those men, I'm going to say shame on you. And there's lots of ifs about if he hadn't been this way, if he hadn't have done this, and if that, blah, 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 blah. And that really has no weight here in this type of situation. Exactly. And Brenda, I want to read this since you posted this, and Brenda commented, I wish as a child I could have known to say shame on you to my parents. Instead, I felt shame for what I did. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. And sometimes just that statement for us feels so freeing. It just take something off of us that we have been carrying, to say, you know, really, shame on you, and not to shame someone, but to bring that shadow to the light through the element, the quality of shame itself. I hope this was of some help for you, and thank you for being present. And thank you for holding this space that we're in right now, of navigating our way through this burning ground that we are living. Namaste.